Hello there my friends, and welcome back to our series of Warhammer book reviews, discussions, and overall rambling extravaganza. Today we're going to be returning to covering the only series on this channel so far that I've actually covered in more than one video. And that series is of course Gotrek and Felix. Arriving now at a review and discussion for book number 4 in the saga, Dragonslayer, written by William King. And to go on a tiny tangent here, I'm actually pretty satisfied with the progress we've made covering this series. And if nothing else, and I can't promise anything, but I would like to actually finish reviewing the entire saga someday. And by the entire saga, I mean where it ends in the old world with the book Slayer. Although curiously enough, I actually have a bit of free time this week and the next, so I've actually thought about reading at least one of the Gotrek Age of Sigmar books, and see if it's any good. Anyway, before we get into the actual review, as usual, I would like to kindly ask you that if you enjoy these episodes, and would like to see more of my stories, narrations, and that type of content, do consider checking out my Patreon page. It is how I earn a living nowadays, and there you can find almost all of my old YouTube content. And recently I've been starting putting up some new daily content as well. And for those of you who keep asking every now and then, you can also find my old lore videos on the Rumble channel. There's like 1,000 videos there and I'm still posting. You can find links to these wonderful things in the description of this video and all my other videos. So, Dragonslayer, ladies and gentlemen. I do wonder what the Gotrek is gonna slay in this one. Although, jokes aside, if you are expecting a regular dragon in this, you are gonna be surprised. This story does continue right after the events of Demonslayer, and for some reason I always confuse the order of events in this book with the next book in the series, which is Beastslayer, because they do end up in the city of Prague, eventually, and they do have to survive an epic siege. However, before any of that happens, we have the events of Dragonslayer. And while this might appear first as some kind of a filler adventure, if you will, with the main set pieces being the adventure in the Chaos Wastes from Demonslayer, and the next one being the Siege of Prague, I would say that Dragonslayer is still as good as any of the other books in the early Gotrek and Felix series. The characters that we introduced last time are still the main ones in this as well. We of course have Ulrika and Max Schreiber being in the spotlight, just like Gotrek and Felix. But we also have a pretty healthy dose of the inimitable Gracier Thanquol, who apparently is coming to the game Total War Warhammer as a legendary lord in the next epic DLC, Lords of the End Times. Not that I want to advertise that or anything. I actually haven't played that one in more than a year. But anyway, in the book, like I said, we do get an adventure filling the gap between the two set pieces mentioned earlier. But we also get introduced to a few new characters and villains, and I'm not just talking about the dragon here. To summarize this in a nutshell, before the synopsis I'll do in the second half of the video, Gotrek, Felix, Snorri and Malachi do escape the Chaos Wastes on the airship, and they do return at the base of Ulrika's father, Ivan Petrovich Stragov. But not all is well there. Thanquol actually attacked the Kislevites in the meantime and took Ulrika and her father prisoners. Gotrek and Felix evidently put a stop to that, and after a battle with the Skaven, they do escape aboard the airship. On the way to Prague, the airship is attacked and heavily damaged by a dragon named Skalandir. Most of the characters do survive, but the hunt is on for the dragon, as Gotrek sees a new opportunity to get his mighty doom. On the dragon hunt, they are joined by several new dwarf characters who are all slayers. And all these slayers are actually quite a colorful bunch, which I'm gonna go over in just a minute or two. Also worth mentioning is that following his defeat this time, Thanquol is captured by a huge chaos army, led by two Tzeentchian sorcerers. More on them too in a bit. And after battling many dangers, including some relationship trouble between Felix and Ulrika, our heroes do fight the dragon in its own lair, in a fight very reminiscent of, the classical knight versus dragon fight in medieval times. And that is kind of it for Dragonslayer. But before we move on to the full synopsis, I definitely want to talk a bit about the new characters in this book. First off, they are not as important to the overall saga as the likes of Snorri Nosebiter or Max or Malachi or Ulrika, but still, even the least recurring of them do appear in the next book as well. And by them, I mean the 4 dwarf slayers that join Gotrek and company in their quest to slay the dragon, or at least some of them. These slayers are, in no particular order, Steg, Grimey, Uli Ullison, and Bjorni Bjornison. Some rather original naming there. Fortunately, even though they appear in just 1 or 2 books, all these dwarves are fairly memorable. Steg is a thief that is gold-obsessed, even by dwarf standards. Grimey actually wears a mask at all times, because he's actually beardless, which is a big deal for a dwarf in case you didn't know. Uli is incredibly loud and boastful, almost to the point of being obnoxious, but in reality he is kind of a coward. And last but not least, Bjorni is my favorite of this group, and I'd say the most memorable. He's a very positive and happy-go-lucky dwarf, who really, and I do mean really, enjoys making lewd jokes. He's also a dwarf with a curious fondness for human women, if you catch my drift, and perpetually talks about his brothel exploits. Another couple of worthwhile characters that are introduced in this book are Loigor Goldenrod and Kelmain Blackstaff, who are twin sorcerers of change. And they're called that because one of them has a black staff and the other one has a golden rod. And they do all the classical creepy twin stereotypes as well, like finishing each other's sentences and acting almost like a hive mind. These two are actually the hidden rulers of the Chaos Army that will get to besiege Prague in the next book. There is also a typical Khorne-esque warlord named Arek Demonclaw, I think it is. And they are also somewhat recurring villains, because these twins do pop up in another 2 or 3 books outside of this one. And speaking of villains, the dragon in this book, Skalandir, I did mention he is not an actually average dragon, but a chaos-corrupted one, which makes it uglier, bigger, scarier, and stronger than a regular dragon. And while dragons are shown to be able to talk in some other Warhammer books, especially elven-focused ones, this one doesn't really do that, although it is described as intelligent. Another thing worth mentioning in this book is how fickle Ulrika sometimes is, as we do get maybe the first couple fighting and disagreements between her and Felix. And to us, the outside observers, I think the author wanted to show that despite being passionate about one another, these two were probably never gonna work in the long run. Because Ulrika is very free-spirited and she has some different worldviews from Felix. Of course, this won't stop Felix from pining after her for half a dozen books after this. And that's kind of it with my thoughts on Dragonslayer. Do I recommend it? Yes, definitely. It is a very fast-paced book that you can read in like a couple of afternoons if you got the time. But then again, outside of maybe a couple of the side books, I would always recommend Gotrek and Felix stuff. At least those in the main saga. This book also has the advantage of being still in that period where Gotrek and Felix's journey wasn't entirely as serious as it's gonna become in the later books. And where the characters, even though they are surrounded by, Warhammer grim darkness, they can still have fun and enjoy the adventure. Though at least one of the characters does die in this book as well. Now, for the synopsis, obviously spoilers ahead, but as I always say, this is meant more for those of you who can't read the book for themselves, or don't want to, or just want to learn what happens in less than 5 minutes. Dragonslayer begins just a few days after the events of Demonslayer, with Gotrek, Snorri, Felix, Borek, Varek, those 2 dwarves if you remember them from Demonslayer, Malachi and the survivors of Karak-Dum flying out of the Chaos Wastes in the spirit of Grungni. They pass over an enormous Chaos army marching southwards towards the Empire and resolve to warn the world of the impending attack. But upon reaching the manor of Ivan Petrovich Stragov, they do find their refuge captured by a force of Clan Molder Skaven, led by none other than Gracier Fanquol. Fanquol had negotiated for support from Clan Molder in his attack to capture the airship of the dwarves, and imprisoned Ivan, Ulrika, and Max Schreiber after that battle. His ambush does go awry when Ulrika kicks him in the groin while he's interrogating her, and his pained cry is mistaken for an attack signal. Gotrek, Felix, and Snorri do hold the Skaven off from atop the mooring tower, while Ulrika breaks free and rescues her father. Utilizing a lot of warpstone, Fanquol then casts a great spell that manages to hold off the spirit of Grungni in a magical claw kind of thing. Still, the tide turns against them when the spirit of Grungni gyrocopters start decimating the ranks of their army. Max is able to dispel Fanquol's magic, freeing the airship, and everyone bursts out of the manor to attack the Skaven in the rear, routing them. Gotrek and Snorri get to kill Bone Ripper III, or the Fourth, and Fanquol flees as well. The survivors of the Karak-Dum expedition are then hailed as heroes, and Felix reunites passionately with Ulrika. After that, they all embark upon a journey to the south to return the Hammer of Firebeard. Ivan gives Ulrika 2 bodyguards, Oleg and Standa, and tells them to warn the Ice Queen of Kislev about the invasion. Max also joins them with the intention to return to Middenheim. But while heading south and, feeding into the actual title of the book, the ship is overtaken by a storm of chaos and blown off course into the World's Edge Mountains. Here they are attacked by a huge chaos dragon named Skalandir. All efforts to hurt the dragon prove kinda worthless until Varek the dwarf, who had befriended Felix from as early as the last book, actually sacrifices himself by crashing a gyrocopter into the monster. Badly wounded, Skalandir retreats. The airship badly damaged now, the passengers are forced to stop for repairs at Karakadren, the Slayer Keep. The dwarven population here celebrates the return of the Hammer of Firebeard and the survivors of Karak-Dum, and the Slayers began to plan a quest to slay the dragon, who had also stirred up the local orc tribes led by one ferocious Ugrek manflayer. Felix and Ulrika's relationship also begins to be a bit rocky because of their differing duties and inexperience with relationships. Max, because we can't have a fantasy epic tale without a love triangle, also begins kinda pining for Ulrika. Ulrika decides to try to reach the Ice Queen on foot, while Felix is honor-bound to accompany Gotrek on his quest to slay the monster. But their paths do lie together for some more time. Eventually they depart, having been joined by 4 new Slayers from the city, which we discussed earlier. Passing through the village of Gelt, the group learns that a bandit leader named Henrik Richter had been recruiting men driven from their homes by the dragon, and now he has almost an army. The travelers do get attacked by orcs and goblins on the way to the mountain, but they do drive them off with a combination of the Slayer's ferocity and Max's magic. Realizing that they are after the dragon, the surviving orcs report back to their warboss, who begins shadowing them. Meanwhile, Fanquol and Lurk traverse the grass plains of Kislev on foot, and are captured by Chaos Warriors, who take them to the leader of the invasion force, one Arek Demonclaw, and his 2 advisors, the sorcerers Loigor and Kelmain. Fanquol actually negotiates an alliance with the Chaos Forces, and they deliver him and Lurk Snitchtongue, remember him, all the way to Hellpit, which is the base of Clan Molder. Meanwhile, traveling deeper into the mountains, the humans and the Slayers encounter villages destroyed by the dragon, and after admitting that she loves Felix, Ulrika decides to stay with him for a while longer to help him kill the dragon. The group also encounters a traveling minstrel named Johann Gatz, whom Felix mistrusts, and for good reason, because he's a spy sent by the bandits. They do eventually reach the Dragon's Mountain, where the dwarves Steg and Uli prove too cowardly to enter, but they do change their minds when Ugrek leads his orcs into the valley. The party finds Skalandir in the lair and attacks, but Steg becomes distracted by the beast's gold. He is then killed when the dragon falls on him, and then Grimme is incinerated by the dragon fire. Still, like a hero of legend, Felix does manage to kill the dragon himself by plunging his magic sword into his skull. The party then returns to the surface to find that the orcs and the bandits were preparing for a pitched battle, both sides having followed the group to the Dragon's Valley. Basically, a free-for-all battle breaks out when Gotrek bellows that the dragon is dead, and the party has to defend themselves against basically everyone. The bodyguards of Ulrich are killed, and Bjorni and Felix take some bad wounds too. But Gotrek manages to kill the warlord Ugrek, and the battle ends in a rout for both sides. They were also helped eventually by the arrival of the spirit of Grungni, who dropped some bombs on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the dragon's treasure hoard is lost when Malachi and Uli accidentally set up some black powder and collapse the tunnel. All is well when it ends well. And this, my friends, has been what I wanted to tell you today about the fourth book in the Gotrek and Felix saga, Dragonslayer, written of course by William King. If you enjoyed this, do consider leaving a like, share and subscribe. Also feel free to share your thoughts on this book and why you love or don't love it. I also welcome suggestions on what books I should cover next, provided of course that I read them. Thanks a lot, and Sigmar's blessings be upon you.